what do people call you at shows and stuff? T. Allen? Or they call you
Yeah, T.
Allen?
Allen or Tim or Butthead
That's it's so confusing when you have the initial.
or worse. We probably shouldn't say over the air, but yeah.
Yeah. Tim Allen Lawson, welcome to the Undraped Artist Podcast.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be here. It's an honor to be here.
No, I appreciate that. Well, the honor's all mine. I'm a huge fan of your work. And I'm so glad you agreed to do this. I can't wait to pick your brain and kind of figure out how you think.
Well, I'm a fan of your podcast, but I'm even a larger fan of your work also.
Oh, thanks.
Your portraits and your sense of color and the way you light your figures.
Oh, thanks.
And,
That means a lot. I appreciate that. Well, tell me a little bit about your life. Have you always wanted to be an artist, and how did you get into this field?
I can't say that I always wanted to be. I grew up in a family, working class family. Nobody in my family was involved in the arts. But I had a wonderful junior high art teacher who started to open my eyes to drawing. And I guess I always kind of drew. I'd get coloring books and trace coloring books, and then kind of add, take one element of one page and make another. But really, my seventh and eighth grade art teacher, a wonderful lady named Nancy Buning, was the first to open my eyes to kind of the arts and the art world and the creative process. And then I was a competitive swimmer also. So I had, and we traveled around in AAU in the summertime, and you get to know, some of the kids from other towns. And there was a wonderful painter named Bob Barlow who took me to the Buffalo Bill Historic Center in Cody, Wyoming. And that was the first museum I went to when it just blew my mind. I saw some of the Frederick Remington paintings and Maynard. They had a couple Maynard Dixon paintings there, and of course at that stage of my life, I wasn't even aware of what I was looking at, but I never forgot them.
How old were you?
Well, I was 10 when I went to the first art museum, and then I was 12 and 13 in junior high, and then the summer of my eighth grade year, right before I went in as a freshman in high school, Nancy invited me to have a two-person show with her here on a little gallery on South Main Street in Sheridan, Wyoming. And I think I had a dozen, maybe 13 or 14 of the worst drawings and a couple paintings ever created by anybody. But a lot of aunts and uncles and parents of friends ended up buying them. So I went into high school with for me, what seemed like a pocket full of cash, and I thought, well, this is the cat's meow. So I went into high school and took every art class and every drawing class that they offered, I think twice, and got through with the bare requirements. And then through Bob Barlow, I was introduced to Ned Jacob, who was down in Denver, Colorado in the early 80s. And then Ned introduced me to kind of that entire Denver school of Mark Daly and Kang Cho and Hollis Williford, John Zahorik. There are a couple others in there, Buffalo Kaplinski that I was never met. And then Ned really became a mentor of mine for the next 20 years or so.
Wow. So what I'm hearing is that you were a kid who realized you could make money selling paintings, so then you decide to go into it for the money.
Um,
Really?
yeah, it's probably, that was, I think even more so than the money, I think going into high school, I think most of us, I know I definitely did, you kind of gravitate toward anything that you can get a little attention of.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so, I kind of became known as the kid that could draw or paint things, and people started to notice me for it. So I wanted to do it more. But it really, when I was introduced to Ned Jacob, and then Mark Daly, and I still have huge appreciation for their work. Kind of that it was a loosely schooled uh, group in Denver, Colorado at the time, and uh, I was extremely lucky. I've been lucky my whole life, Jeff. And meeting that group of artists at the time, and they had a great deal of influence on me. And then, I from that very first museum I went to in Cody, Wyoming, I've always loved to go to museums. And then occasionally, throughout the last 45 years or so, there have been key exhibitions that I've seen in different parts of the world that literally change and alter the course of my life. And sometimes it's not even a full exhibition. I was at the Museum of Fine Arts one time on the way to the cafeteria, and I saw a painting entitled "Mirror and Sink" by Antonio Lopez Garcia, and it literally stopped me dead in my tracks. And then that was the first introduction. I had no idea. I'd never heard of him before. And when I was introduced to his work, and then a number of years ago, I had the opportunity to actually go over to Madrid and meet him and
Oh,
spend
wow.
time in his studio. But his work, being introduced to his work, really changed the way I approach my work. If nothing else, it gave me the freedom that I could slow down and spend more time. We see, and I'm sure you're familiar with his work.
Oh, yeah.
But a lot of times we don't get to see many of his originals in this country. The Museum of Fine Arts in Boston has a few of them, and there are a couple of them in museums around the country, but we don't get to see a lot of them. So you see a lot of them in the publications, and you'll see these 10, 12, 15-foot paintings reproduced down onto, an image on a page, and they look photorealism. But when you see the originals, there's a wonderful abstraction to them. He'll have markings gridded off left in the paint, and he leaves it that way. There'll be, on those big cityscapes, there'll be a nail hole in the panel where he's had his perspective string, and I wouldn't have enough backbone to leave that. I'd want to putty it in and paint over it.
Same. Yeah.
But when I had the chance to meet him, I don't speak any Spanish. My cervezas, even poorly pronounced, but so I had a wonderful interpreter there with me, who put the introduction together in the afternoon together. And I told Antonio Lopez that I realized that he's considered one of the greatest realists alive today, but I saw a lot of abstraction in his work, and I want to know if that was intentional or if it was just part of the painting process for him. And he was so modest, and there was always that awkward time of the translation.
Yeah.
And so you'd sit there, and there's that delay, and he would wave his arms, and he didn't want to hear anything about being considered one of the greatest realists alive today. But then he got this little smile on his face, and through the interpretation, it came back that the abstraction is what makes it real. And I thought, boy, that really struck home to me.
And how much did that influence your painting from there on out?
Well, it influenced my painting in the time that I can slow down. A lot of times, I think most of us feel like we get deadlines and we get on this treadmill that we've got to put things out. And So as much as anything, it gave me permission in my own work to slow down and put some time and thought into it. And, I'm a pretty slow, methodical painter anyway. But, when you see that his great painting, Grand Via, of that avenue going down one of the main streets in Madrid, he worked on for 7 years.
7 years?
7 years. He painted the entire thing on location. And
Holy mackerel.
and so and then you'd think, all right, I spent 7 years on this, and I'm finished with it. But if you look at through his work, like the next summer or the next spring, he moved a couple blocks down the street and started another one that I think he worked 5 or 6 years on. So
Jeez.
and his drawing, his really portraitures of interiors of his studios, and just the highly observed, that to spend enough time to sharpen your ability to see, has changed my work a lot, in that, I'll really investigate. Ned Jacob, who I mentioned earlier, is one of the great draftsmen of our time, but he was he could draw extremely quickly, gesture drawings, and they were, perfectly in proportion and stuff. And when I was spending a lot of time with him, I could see him in a parade. He could draw a horse and rider complete, fully, in the time it took that rider and horse to move 40 or 50 feet in a parade. And so that's kind of how I grew up drawing in my early part of my career. Is I was doing a lot of figurative drawing, I was doing a lot of gestural drawing, but I really didn't spend a lot of time really investigating the possibilities of drawing.
Yeah, that's incredible. I noticed that you have some interiors that you've done in graphite that actually reminded me of Antonio Lopez Garcia a little bit. And were those inspired by his work?
Well, I think the first one where I really had seen his work just in publications, somebody gave me a wasp nest, and on a wonderful crabapple branch, and I put it in, I nailed it to my easel, or the first time I clamped it to my easel, and I got a full sheet, 30 by 22 inch piece of handmade twin rocker paper, and I started it just in graphite, and I did it, and I wanted to do it, I wanted to really pay homage to the wonderful construction of this wasp nest. It was probably about 14 inches high.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent 2 or 3 weeks drawing this, sight size directly from life. And the minute I thought I was finished, I thought I did the first one vertically, and I thought, yeah, he's got these wonderful branches. And so I just grabbed another sheet of paper and set that first drawing aside and started another one 15 minutes after I finished the first one. And I did it a horizontal, and then I used some pastel that I think I'd read somewhere or had seen somebody that they told me that pastel is water soluble. And so I just used the tips of, just dry regular pastel, but I wet the tips of it. And so I added just a little bit of color of the branch and a few of the leaves. And, I worked another couple weeks and maybe a month on that. And then I ended up doing a third drawing of it. And when I had that third drawing on the easel or in the studio, I had a visitor, Guillermo, who is the director of the Baron Thyssen Museum in Madrid, came with Timothy Standring to the studio, and he mentioned something almost under his breath about Lopez Garcia. And I said, excuse me, what'd you just say? And he said, oh, we in Madrid, we have a painter, Antonio Lopez Garcia. And then intensity of this drawing reminds me of a little bit of his work. And I just, I went, kind of gobsmacked. And he said, are you familiar with his work? And I said, he's one of my heroes. And I said, do you know him? He said, he's one of my best friends. I've curated his 2 major exhibitions in Madrid. And he said, if you come to Madrid, I'll arrange it for you to meet him. And I think I had my plane booked before Guillermo left the studio.
That's awesome.
So it really was it was a magical time. It was one of the great moments of my life to be able to meet.
Yeah, I bet. So tell me, you mentioned some of your mentors, but what about your education? Did you have any formal education, like art schools or university art departments or anything?
I grew up in Sheridan, Wyoming, as I said, and I didn't know other than, I met Ned Jacob the year I graduated high school, or maybe the year before, I think in 1980. But I really didn't, as a career-wise, my parents were encouraging, but it was also encouragement, but there were no, they weren't going to finance, a vagabond artist trying to go. So I went briefly to New Mexico, or to Dallas, Texas, there were, in the early 80s, there were a string of schools. I think there was one in Fort Lauderdale. They were called the Fashion and Art Institute. And there was one in Dallas, Texas. So I went to Dallas for a few, I lasted a couple months at the school, and I thought, this isn't for me. And then my watercolor teacher said, if you're really serious about it, there are 2 schools that I would highly recommend. The Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, and the American Academy of Art in Chicago. And this was in 1983. And so I applied to both of them. And a couple of the painters in Denver had gone to the American Academy. So I was more familiar with that. And so I ended up going to the American Academy for 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you kind of get, or I kind of got used to having that student label on me, and it was a huge safety net.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't really ready to get out into the, kind of the art world. And so in my travels down the East Coast and in visiting Old Lyme, Connecticut, where a lot of the American Impressionists started, John Twachtman, Henry Ward Ranger, Child Hassan, that whole school of American Impressionists there in Midcoast, Connecticut. I found the Lyme Academy of Old Lyme, or that I think it was called the Lyme Academy of Fine Art in Old Lyme, Connecticut. And so I went there for a little over a year. And there was a fabulous instructor named Dean Keller there, who really, and there was a great group, a very small group, but a really incredible group of talented artists there. Tom and Peggy Root, and Caleb Stone. And then I had a friend that came with me from Wyoming named Toby Burr. And so I spent a little over a year at Old Lyme. And that's my, formal education.
And I'm surprised. I mean, and did you study realism with these teachers?
So I studied, there we were doing almost solid figurative stuff, figurative drawing and figurative painting, both at the American Academy in Chicago. We had a live model in the morning for 3 hours and then a live model in the afternoon for 3 hours.
I'm surprised in the 80s. I mean, that was like the height of modernism.
Yeah.
That you were able to find a department like that.
And there really wasn't a lot of choices then. I think now, there are all kinds of ateliers and these schools, and you see this wonderful group of, to me, they're kids. They're, in their late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, and their ability to draw and paint the figure is just, so much more of the traditional teaching now than there was, in the mid '80s.
Mm-hmm. So when you finished at Lyme, how long did it take you? Well, that's more specifically, what did you do next? I mean, what happened between finishing at Lyme and becoming a full-time painter?
Well, I was always painting full time. I was still doing a lot of plein air painting when I was in Old Lyme. I was doing a lot of landscape painting, almost exclusively, plein air or on the spot. And then I started to, and I felt like I got to a point where I felt like I drew fairly well with all the drawing that I was doing with the live, drawing from live models, and I thought that I was fairly competent in putting a piece together on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd really never had a kind of studio or worked in a studio before. I didn't know how to work in a studio. The first couple of years that I went to a studio, all of my panels were kind of limited to the size of the refrigerator or a box freezer that I could put them in to kind of retard the drawing, because I was only used to working wet on wet. And so I was petrified for paint to dry because I didn't know what to do with it afterwards. And now, at this point in my career, it's kind of just the opposite. I can't get the paint to dry fast enough because I do a lot of layered paint and a lot of manipulation of the pigment itself, and to try to create these layers in the final piece.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Does any of that make sense? Or
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I went through the same thing when I was starting. I guess you could say I learned alla prima first, and I had a teacher that told me once, it was terrible advice. It took me literally 8 years to get over it. But I had a teacher at the university I attended say, if you have to paint on it after it dries, you didn't get it right the first time and you're a lousy painter. and I didn't have any other experience. So I believed that teacher. I mean, who else? I mean, I have no one else to listen to, right? And this is, of course,
yeah,
before the internet was huge and YouTube was big. So, yeah, I remember 8 years later experimenting with wet on dry and being like, what the heck? I got totally deceived. There's
yeah.
that's where to me, that's where it really gets interesting, when you start layering oil paint.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, George Carlson, who I'm sure you're familiar with
Mm-hmm.
George's work. And when I first saw one of George's original canvases, it blew my mind. It reminded me more of a beautiful tapestry than it did, the typical oil painting that I see. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a stretch where George won, I think 5 or 6 consecutive years, where he won the Artist Choice Award, and at that point, George and I I felt extremely honored to be able to call George a friend, and we were fairly close and still are. I called him and I said, George, it's congratulations once again, but you're going to have an asterisk put next to your name like Barry Bonds does with his home run record, because you're sculpting with paint where the rest of us are just painting with it. It's unfair. You're cheating.
That's funny.
So, but his work, being introduced to George's work here later in my life, in the last 10 years or so, has had a huge impact of mine. And, I see those layers in nature. I see the nuances and the subtleties that I sure can't get painting wet into wet.
Mm-mm.
And it's hard to do it even, wet over dry, scumbling and dragging and layering. But it gives me, I think I get a tiny bit closer by painting that way. And of what I actually see in reality in nature.
Yeah. So speaking of nature, what is it about nature, because clearly that's well, actually, I take that back. I mean, it seems like when I look at your work, I'm looking off to the one side because I have your website up here, but when I look at your work, it seems like you have several focuses. You have architecture, typically houses, which
Yeah.
are so beautiful. I can't wait to
Okay.
talk about those. And then landscape, but I feel like they're related because it's all part of the outside, right?
Yeah.
And then on occasion you do interiors, but for the most part, it seems like you're focused on exterior spaces, right? But you said you studied the figure. Well, how did you come to land on that as being your primary focus?
For the first couple months or half a year after I got out of school, I tried to do figurative stuff, figurative pieces, but it always required a model.
Hmm.
You'd have a model lined up, you'd have your day lined up, and at the last minute they would call and cancel, or they'd show up a half an hour late, which then I'm pissed, and it's
Yeah,
not a
it's a
good
pain in the butt.
not a good mindset to go in when you're trying to create something. And
Hmm.
so the frustration of that, and I had painted from nature and from life, from the very beginning, and I never had that disappointment or angst or really having to rely on something else to get into the creative process. So I think I just naturally gravitated in my love of outdoors. Growing up in Wyoming, I just love being outside, and so that love of being outdoors, being in nature, I think just made it a natural transition for me to go back and pursue, kind of landscape. You mentioned the houses. When I'm doing a house, or in a sense, a tree. If I'm really focused on a tree, I approach that, I think, like you do, or like most people would, a portrait. I'm trying to do a portrait of that specific tree, not just kind of a generic rendering of a cottonwood or a white pine or something. But having said that, I just finished a drawing that I worked on for a couple of years, and I titled it "The Becton Statesman." That is on the way to. I pass it every day to the studio, and then every afternoon or evening when I'm on the return out to the ranch. And um, I was given permission to walk around the field, and the piece was done mostly, almost entirely in the studio. But I'd stop, spend half an hour, sometimes an hour, just sitting watching the tree. And I even though I considered it being a full portrait of that tree, I left out one major limb that, for the painting's sake or the drawing's sake, was going kind of against the design on it. So,
Right.
when you're painting a tree, that you have that great luxury. I mean, if you're painting a portrait, it's kind of hard to leave, a nose or one eye out.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't like your nose. It's ugly. I'm gonna leave that out.
So, and, the fine tuning of a head, if you're off just a, fraction of an inch, you have a huge distortion. And in a tree, you can be off, a couple inches from where a branch comes out or so. So I kind of like that flexibility where you don't have to be so exact.
Right.
But I approach it just like I would if I were still doing portraiture or doing a figurative piece.
Yeah, that's for trees though. But one of the things about your houses that are so incredible is they kind of are like a portrait. I recently was at a plein air competition here in Utah, and I did a portrait of a house. And man, it's not easy. Like you gotta think about perspective. If you don't get everything right, things just don't come together.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's almost like painting a portrait when you're doing a house.
Yeah. Well, to me, particularly in New England, and where you have those old houses, you'll have houses that are, in the early 18th century, built,
Yeah.
1720, and they've gone through so many adaptations, and there used to be a doorway here and now it's a wall, or they cut a window in there. They're almost like a living thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a different time frame than we are, but they have scars and bruises, and they're constantly changing all the time, and I love that about it, and I think about that when I'm working on them.
Yeah, and it shows in them. And we're going to pull those up in a bit. Once I pick your brain just just a little bit more. So I want to go back to your childhood again. I had one question I never got to ask you. So did you know you had talent when you were young? I mean, before
I
you were introduced to your junior high teacher?
No, and even in junior high, I don't think I wasn't the best drawer. We didn't paint much. We drew mostly in junior high, but we did a little painting, I guess. I wasn't the best in my class, but I was definitely, I might have been the most interested in it. I don't know. I never had the chance to ask my eighth grade teacher, my junior high teacher. I had her both in seventh and eighth grade, why she chose me to have the show with her. That summer of would have been 1977, because I wasn't the best student in the class.
And you're not just being modest?
No, I really wasn't. But
Huh.
I did have, you know, I've had an I kind of have this addictive personality that I get a hold of something and I just, I can't get enough of it.
Hmm.
Whether it's books or, drawing, any kind of information, I want to learn more, know more about it, more about it, more about it. So I think even though I wasn't the best drawer or painter or artist, I definitely wasn't an artist at the time, but a painter of there, I think I probably had the most interest in it in the class. And I don't know, I never had the chance to ask her. She passed away a couple of years ago. Um, but I'd like to think maybe that's what she saw in me, was my interest in it. And
Hmm.
I think I probably did have more interest in it than anybody else in class.
Sounds like you have a lot of grit. I mean, you said you get obsessed with things, and I imagine you just don't back down until you succeed. Am I right?
Well, I don't know if I ever get to a part where the success is there, I'll let you know. But I
Well, you
definitely,
know what I mean. I mean,
I mean,
until you've pushed yourself to the limit.
well, I don't know if it's me. I always thought, when I was just starting out, because I didn't have a family, none of my parents were in there or grandparents were in the arts, so I really didn't have an example set for me. And my fear early on in my career was that I would run out of ideas or inspiration to paint. I kind
Hmm.
of get to a point that I wouldn't know what to paint. But I also thought that I would be able to kind of have a pretty good handle on the painting, just the application of uh, whether it's drawing or painting. Um, and it now, 42 years later or something, uh, it's almost the exact opposite that's happened. I struggle more with my paintings now than I have at any point in my career. And
Isn't
I
that
have,
isn't that just how it goes? That's the same way I
it
feel.
is. And my biggest problem is, I still get starting a painting is one of the true enjoyments of life where it has all the possibility in the world. Um, and and so my problem is to try to finish them. I'm sitting here in the studio and I think I can see 16 or 18 pieces for my next exhibition in London that I should be working on trying to finish them up, but I get an idea and I want to start another painting while that idea is still kind of that intense inspiration is still fresh. And
Hmm.
so I'll spend a couple days doing some thumbnail designs for the composition, or might work in a little color in some of the drawings, and then I'll block in the painting. And it seems like where I should be working on that for the next 2 or 3 or 4 months to kind of get the meat into it. I'll get a week into it, and then I'll be driving into the studio and I'll see something else, and I think, oh, that is a great idea. And
Mm-hmm.
so I come in that studio and start the drawing process and compositional proportions of canvas and composition all over again, and spend the next 2 or 3, 4 days working that, and then blocking another painting. So I have truly a studio full of paintings that are blocked in right now that at some point I'm going to have to get back to
Hmm.
and try to
I just
try to.
interviewed Zoe Frank. You familiar with her work?
Oh yeah, I did love her work.
Yeah, speaking of abstraction, I mean, yeah, she's really got it down. I mean, that combination of abstract and realism. But
Yeah.
um
And the
she's
layering in her work also.
I know, it's incredible. Yeah, it was great to interview her, but she said the same thing. She's like, yeah, I love to start paintings, but I struggle to finish them. And that
Yeah.
I told her, but I'm the opposite. It's just like I love the finish because I finally get to see what it's going to look like. So, and then I'm afraid to approach the next one, scared out of my mind. A blank
Well,
canvas is the scariest thing for me. It's like, oh, it's
a blank canvas
horrifying.
is a scary thing for me also. But, there's always that. Um, I guess a blank canvas. There's always that possibility.
Mm-hmm.
That one might succeed. Um, for me, even with the best intentions of you can spend a lot of time trying to lock in the composition and everything, and I get it blocked in, and that's an enjoyable part. And I'd say my block in is maybe 15% to what I consider a finished painting, particularly when I want to try to layer the paint and
Mm-hmm.
get some paint on the panel or on the canvas. And then that kind of from 15 to 80% is it's like a wrestling match.
Mm-hmm.
It's a struggle, and the painting, uh, takes on a life of its own, and it usually has the upper hand. For me, I feel like a lot of times I'm just getting my butt whooped.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then you kind of get through, and that last 10, 15% of finishing it, it does get exciting again.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
mean, usually it's when I put all my reference material away, and I have a nice, comfy chair in my studio, and a lot of times I'll just sit for half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, just looking at the painting and trying to get back to that feeling of what first inspired me, um, how the subject first grabbed me. And
Hmm.
then it's just, for me, that finishing part is a lot of times it can just be a little tiny changing a shape of some element in the painting, or adding a little texture to the foreground or something, or simplifying an area. Uh,
Hmm.
but I'm not sure. I never know when they're really finished.
I know. That's yeah, the curse of a painter. To never know when you're done.
Yeah,
You mentioned the struggle, the fight. It to me, it's like a Rocky movie. Those fights he always has at the end where he's getting his butt kicked, and then
yeah,
at the end you finally. I mean, it's like I never feel like I exactly win, but at the end, hopefully, if it all goes well, I finally figure it out in the
yeah.
last day or two. But the whole process is like going home night after night. Oh my gosh, I suck at painting. Why do I even do this for a living?
But
Yeah, it's a struggle.
it really is, and I remember. It's been, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7, 8 years ago. I was really struggling at one point, and I called George Carlson. And have you ever met George?
No.
George is a lot like what his paintings, more, I think, more so than his sculptures. The sculptures can be, they're strong, they have a great deal of energy. But I see George's paintings as being very serene, and he's a very soulful, quiet person. And I felt just like you did. And, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. I just, it's too much of a struggle. I'm no good at it. And he listened to me for probably, a good 5 full minutes or something. And he said, well, Tim, it sounds to me like you're exactly where you need to be.
Mm-hmm.
Everything worthwhile happens within that struggle. And if I could give you a little advice, he said, if you ever have a piece that just kind of feels like it's painting itself, he said, those are the ones you want to kind of set aside because, over time, those probably aren't as good as you think they are at the moment.
Yeah. And that's the irony. You said earlier that now you feel like you struggle more than when you were younger. I feel
Yeah.
the same way. And many artists I've talked to who've been painting a while feel the same way.
Yeah, well, I think I hope over this, because I consider myself more of a student than I do a painter or an artist. And there's a big difference to me between an artist and a painter. I think there are some incredible painters out there that some of their work just knocks my socks off. But I think, and there are more and more great painters, and one thing I think there's a lot of disadvantages about social media, but one of the great things about it is you can get on Instagram and see work from all over the world, and painters, artists that I've never heard of before, and some of the work I see is just jaw-droppingly good.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the things to me is that artists have an ability to put something of themselves into it. There's much more to just going out and rendering what's in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of decisions to be made. And I think if it's done correctly, that there's something of the viewer to, because I view the viewer as an important part of my definition of art. And I liken it, and if I'm teaching, I'll bring up the example of if you've ever had the opportunity to go to a final dress rehearsal at a theater, that nobody in the performance is learning anything brand new at the final dress rehearsal. They all have their steps down. They all know their lines. It's a complete performance at that point. But the difference between the final dress rehearsal and opening night, I don't think anybody could argue that it's the same performance.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, there's only one thing that separates those two, and that's the audience. But the audience, it brings in a lot of electricity, a lot of, there's a connective energy there that makes it even though they're doing the exact same lines and steps and choreographed performance, it's a different thing on opening night than it is on the final dress rehearsal.
So how does that apply to painting?
Well, what's one of your favorite paintings of all time?
Oh, you put me on the spot. Yeah, I have no idea. You totally put me on the spot. I can't think of one right now.
Say we take a great masterpiece like, Rembrandt's Night Watchman or any.
Okay.
Raphael.
Well, I'll tell you one that I literally almost made me cry. And it was, and I just mentioned it in another podcast, but it was when I saw Bouguereau's Satyrs and the Nymphs, or Satyr and the Nymphs, or something like that.
So let's take that painting there. Well, let's take Bouguereau's Satyrs and the Nymph. And if we crate that up and put that in storage, is it a great work of art?
That's like, do you hear a tree falling in the forest? Or what's that?
It's a little bit like that. And I would argue that great work of art just becomes pigment on linen or on canvas. It's just reduced down to what it is in reality. It's just paint and pigment.
But isn't that the weird thing about what we do, though? We're just smearing mud around.
And it will stay. It stays in that sense where it's just a painting.
Yeah.
Well, at some point, somebody removes it from the vault, takes it out of the crate, and then if it's done correctly, and somebody looks at it, then it's that transaction. So to me, the definition of art isn't necessarily the ink on the page, or the choreographed steps on stage, or the notes of music. But it happens within that distance between the viewer and the art hanging on the wall, or the book you're holding in the great works of literature, or even in music, that from where the orchestra or the rock band is playing to the thing. And if you're
Okay.
rehearsing and there's no audience there, it's a rehearsal. But
Yeah,
if you
makes sense.
completely the same notes and have the same tempo and everything, but there's an audience there, all of a sudden that rehearsal becomes a work of art. That piece of music becomes a work of art.
Does it matter that the audience simply matter the audience is there, or is it dependent on the reaction of the audience?
Well, I think it has to do with a little bit of both. I think first of all, the creator has to put something of themselves into it,
Mm-hmm.
um, for the viewer to you know get something out of it. And for me, and the difficulty of it, and I think I can speak for you also because I see it in your work, is there's a great deal of um, feeling energy that goes into your work, and that's felt by the viewer, as or sensed by the viewer.
Hmm.
But there are painters out there that just kind of that they go out and kind of render exactly what they see without prioritizing them, or asking kind of a what's the hierarchy, what's the overall theme of it. And the
Mm-hmm.
paintings can be staggering, um, but I don't think they have a great shelf life. You look at them a second, third time, and then you think it's not as great as I thought it was. And then there are works of art that you kind of walk by maybe the first couple times, and then you'll see something, and it grabs your attention. You're like, oh my God, I've never seen that before. And I didn't see that in the painting the first time. And then, I think a work of art kind of reveals itself over time, that the more you look at it, the more you see it. And um,
Hmm. So,
Danton,
I'll finish your thought. Go
Danton
ahead.
LaCruz's work does that for me. I mean, they
Yeah.
appear, or Emil Carlson, they appear just kind of a standard still life, but then when you really start to look at them, or Carlson's landscapes also, the more you look at them, you're like, oh my God, look at all those little nuances in there that I just didn't see before.
So, if an artist is dependent on their audience, can an artist really, or can a painter really define themselves as an artist? And the reason I ask that is because I've thought a lot about this. Because one of my heroes when I was in college was Wayne Thiebaud. I don't know if you're familiar with my work prior to 2008, but I was hugely influenced by Wayne Thiebaud, and I had the opportunity to meet him in person once, and I was freaking starstruck meeting him.
Yeah.
And he said something that blew my mind. I'm paraphrasing. I don't remember exactly how he put it, but he says, "I don't know if I'm an artist." And I sat out there thinking, "What? You don't know if you're an artist? You're Wayne Thiebaud. You're in art history books, for crying out loud." And then he expounded on it, and I can't remember exactly what he'd said, but I left there. It kind of changed my life in a way, because I've always had that attitude since. And that it's like our audience almost has to tell us or define whether or not we're an artist. History has to define whether or not we're an artist in a way. At least that's how
History.
I see it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think most historians think that it's about 50 years after our life when everything's sorted out.
Yeah. I mean, do we still
And
matter in 50 years?
yeah,
Or are
and
we,
I think
yeah.
and I think all we can do is creative individuals is be true to yourself, um, and you mentioned Zoe Frank earlier. I mean, I was familiar with her work 12 years ago through a gallery in Maine called Gary Haynes. And, her work was nothing like it is today.
Hmm.
You could see a little tiny bits of it. Um, but what she's doing now is so exciting. And I don't know anybody that is doing what she's doing right now. But,
Hmm.
she's followed her interest, a lot of it is intuition as much as anything.
Hmm.
Um, but if you're honest with yourself, to this point, to this day, I still have no idea what's going to inspire me for my next painting.
Hmm.
Um, it can be a scene that I've passed a couple hundred times, and then one day, whether it's you're just there at the right time or the right light, and I think a lot of it has to do with the clarity and the openness of your mind, that something connects. And, I used to, when I was younger, I used to drive around and drive around and drive around looking for, kind of
That's
the
what I
right.
still do. It's terrible. Oh man.
Um,
But now
but
now it comes easier, I'm assuming. Now things are
well,
just
now the inspiration comes easier because I can, a lot of times I don't I do very little plein air painting anymore. I've kind of designed these color charts that I'll take out in the field, and instead of worrying about the relationships over two and a half hour time, I'm much more interested in the relationships over a 5-10 minute window. And I can't paint that quickly, but I can observe and take notes and write thoughts down of what my feelings are at the time. And then almost all my work now is done in the studio. And I
so
use photographic reference, but I use my color charts. And a lot of it for me is forgetting what was out there in reality and trying to create a piece that has the more of the feeling of what was out there than what was really there.
yeah. That's
Does
the
that make
thing
sense?
about your work. Oh, absolutely. That's the thing about your work that I love so much. And I was actually thinking about you one day when I was driving home from somewhere and I saw this incredible sunset and I shot it with my cell phone and it's got HDR on it. The iPhone 13. It's an incredible camera. It's amazing. But even with the HDR, it didn't quite capture the relationship between the sky and the foreground. The sky was a little bit almost too bright, right?
Yeah.
And you've got, and I know you're working from photos because I know, because I'm looking in your studio right now. I can tell you're in a studio, right? But your work looks like it's not. It looks like it's from life. So I want to know about these color studies. How much information are you collecting and how much do you need in order to take a photograph that doesn't have the same dynamic range and turn it into a really convincing representation of real life?
Well, these color charts that I have are they're designed where each major color that I have on my palette, and I have a fairly large palette. I think there are 14 colors that I kind of say is my normal palette. But then I said I've had this addictive personality, and I'm a junkie in an art store. I mean, I'll go into Vasari in New York, or Dick Blick, or just going through a catalog and saying, "Oh God, it sounds like a really cool color," just by the name of it. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I'll order a tube or sometimes two tubes of paint, and I'll kind of introduce that new color to the colors that I'm familiar with in my palette. And these color charts work where they're based on just two color mixtures and then white to tint it out. And so with just those two colors, you get these wonderful subtleties that I wouldn't. I think I could spend a lot of time in the painting, and I'd never. For a blue, for an example, when I'm out in plein air, when I was doing a lot of plein air work, I kind of look and I think, all right, is that sky? Does that lean more toward ultramarine, or is that more toward cobalt, or maybe perhaps cerulean? And but on these color charts, if you mix cobalt and cerulean, you get a completely different blue than you could, nudging either one of those. And
Hmm.
so it's never the right color. I don't have these charts where you go out and say that's exactly the color I'm seeing. But when I'm back in the studio, because there are only two colors in white, you can mix. I can mix those proportions perfectly. Now, in an ideal world, I'd do all of my mixtures like that, and then you'd have really clean color because you can't create a muddy color with just mixing two colors together.
Yeah, but when you say two colors, do you mean two primary colors?
No, it'd just be any color, like
E-
I
Even
might have
browns?
even browns.
Oh, okay.
If you mix, I have a wonderful Old Holland makes a color called warm sepia extra. It's just one of my favorite colors.
Mm-hmm.
If you mix that with burnt umber, you'll get a different brown than either kind of the burnt umber range will give you or the warm sepia brand. So a lot of times I'll mix colors like that together. Um,
And are you
and
getting
then
colors you can't mix with just red, blue, and yellow? I mean, are you
oh
hitting? You
yeah,
are.
yeah. Or at least I think I am. Uh,
Okay, you're totally changing my attitude here. I've always had this attitude. Oh, who needs color charts? But now you're starting to change my mind. Maybe I should experiment with this. I've never in my entire career done a color chart.
so and I did them in school. We were forced to do them in school, but nobody told you the value of it. And
No one's
mine are
told me.
different.
You're just barely telling me. This is great stuff.
Here, dude, I'll grab one here.
Okay. So, do you take these into the field and then say, okay, in the foreground I see color A, B, and C. In the
Yeah.
sky I see
So
color C, D, and F.
so in the so this is one. This is one of a Vasari color called Cypress Umber D, and so on this, and they're all this size because I have a little portfolio that I take them out in the field with, and you really,
It's hard to see, but
yeah, you don't get to see the full range of them, but
no.
so this is just right out of the tube mixed down with white,
Throw them
and
on your
then
throw them near your canvas where they're in the light more. Even though it's farther away, maybe it'll help. Nah, it's too
so does
far.
that.
That's too far.
No.
Yeah. That's all right. We get
Anyway,
an idea.
but it's so each one like this is for yellow ochre,
Oh, that's much easier to see. Yeah.
and then in
So yellow ochre and everything else on your palette? Is that what you're telling me?
yeah, so this is just yellow ochre right here on what would be on the left hand side.
Okay.
It's just straight yellow ochre out, and then it's mixed with yellow ochre, and alizarin sits on the just to the right. I kind of have the Rubens palette layout, and only yellow ochre and alizarin in this next one,
So why don't I
and then
see the actual just alizarin on there?
well because then that would be on my alizarin chart. So I want everything on my yellow ochre chart to stay within yellow ochre. So the mixture between yellow ochre and alizarin on the yellow ochre chart is different than it would be alizarin and yellow ochre on the alizarin chart.
Oh, so okay. So when you mix on the yellow ochre chart, when you mix yellow ochre with alizarin, what is your first percentage of
Well,
alizarin?
you really can't go. It's just kind of
I
by
mean,
feel
well, I know, but
because
estimating.
if you do a percentage, if you do 50% alizarin and 50% yellow ochre, it's not going to look like there's any yellow ochre in there because alizarin is it has much more tinning strength
Oh,
than
so you're okay. All right. Just so I understand. So you have yellow ochre on the top left corner. The
yeah
next one is just an average, a good mixture that feels right between yellow ochre and alizarin, and then you go down adding white.
yeah. And
Okay.
then
Okay.
red, kind of orange, yellow deep, yellow medium, and then into the blues and into the browns.
See, I thought you
So,
were going yellow ochre and then adding a little bit of yellow alizarin or a little bit of alizarin, a little more alizarin, a little more alizarin. That's what I thought you were doing. Okay.
no, I do have in the studio in Maine. I do have a couple charts. And again, this just gives you kind of an example of the range of a color. But if
Okay.
you really want to get into it, you could do that where you could take two colors. You could take yellow ochre and alizarin and put yellow ochre on the right side, alizarin on the left side, and then mix to the middle. Then you would have a full range of what those two colors could do together.
Okay.
And I do have a couple panels where I've taken cobalt and cadmium orange, and, cobalt on the right, cadmium orange on the left, try to mix a neutral gray right in the middle, and then nudge each one of them back out to the pure color.
So,
And it gives you a stunningly beautiful board or chart with just two colors in white.
so when did you discover that you needed this? Maybe need is the wrong word. When did you discover the value in this?
I discovered the value in it when I was really out in the field, and it became really frustrated, trying to mix paint. You say that, that last 10 minutes before the sun sets, or, which I think is even more difficult, the following 10 minutes after the sun sets or before the sun rises in the morning, where that the sky particularly, but as a result, everything else in the landscape is related to that changing sky color. And it was a frustration. I always felt like I was, like chasing my tail around.
So you're out on a
And
sunset, painting a landscape in plein air. You're chasing this violet or whatever color in the sky, and then you go home and realize, wait a minute, if I figure out all the violets ahead of time, then I can know it because I've only got a few minutes. Then I can just refer to that formula on location.
So it might have my cobalt violet chart out in the field or chart like that. And if I'm watching that sunset or right after it's set, you've got that upland glow. I can glance down and in, a few 3, 5, 8 seconds, I can find a combination of two colors, cobalt violet and something else. I think of cobalt violet because it's so soft and it creates so many wonderful grays with it. And then I can glance down and it might be, cobalt violet and terra vert, which, I would never think of that combination in my head if I'm in the studio, or if I'm in the field, I just wouldn't think of that. But because on the chart I have it, it creates this wonderful kind of neutral, vibrating gray, and there's no muddiness to it because it's just two colors. And then I can glance down, or it might be cobalt and cadmium lemon yellow, and I can glance down and see what roughly what value it is, and so I can make a note, cobalt violet plus CLE, cadmium lemon yellow, or CLY, number 6 on my value chart. And that will never be the exact color, but when I get back in the studio, I trust my charts much more than I do the photograph. And like the photograph you mentioned, just didn't have this thing. So that gets me, that at least gets me a kind of a finger hold when I'm in the studio, when I'm blocking in the painting or starting.
Yeah.
And then the other way I use them is I'll lay 3 or 4 or 5 charts out on the field, on just my studio floor, and I think, okay, this chart works really well with the colors on this chart, and that's how I'll key a lot of my paintings.
This is so awesome. I never would have thought to do this stuff.
And then, of course, when I'm in the painting process, I'm lazy and I start to mix the third or fourth color and that's where I think the struggle really starts.
Right. Yeah. You start chasing it. So when you're in the field, you mentioned you have the charts with you, but are you doing a plein air study and referring to those, or are you just taking written notes?
A lot of times I'll do just a composition, a thumbnail drawing.
A drawing.
And then
Okay.
And then I'll make little color call outs with those notations. And then other times, depending on the situation, I'll just write down feelings and then have some notations of that kind of combination that I mentioned earlier.
But what about value? How do you how do you record the value without a study?
A lot of times I'll go back, and do a more developed value study,
Hmm.
or went back in the studio when I'm really playing around, because I'll play around a lot with the compositions back in the studio when I'm removed from the subject matter, where I feel like if I remove myself from the subject matter, the essence of the scene or the subject stays with me longer than all of the actuality of the scene. And so then I do a number of compositional drawings. I'll change the proportion of the pan of the canvas or the panels. I'll try a vertical or a long horizontal or one that's more rectangular, square. And again, it's just kind of the feeling that I had. But when I'm out in the field, I have a tendency to draw more of what's there. When I'm back in the studio, away from it, I can remember my feeling of what was important to me. But if there's a telephone pole right in the middle of it, and I don't feel that it works, it's much easier for me to take that out when I'm not right there. I have a tendency when I'm out in the field and I'm drawing and the telephone pole's right there, and I think I should move that off to the side. It seems to sneak right back into where it is in reality.
Yeah, I have the same issue, and I've always attributed it to my lack of time. It's like I feel like I don't have time to be precise and creative at the same in the same hour and a half. So I tend to be more
And
literal
so
too.
the plein air work I do now is gotten really abbreviated, where a lot of times I'll just put color mixtures right next to each other, and not and with no attention to detail or shapes, just those color relationships, as you know, and I see in your work. When if you have a color and you think it's the exact color, and then you put a color next to it, it's that relationship between the two colors that's more important than either one of the colors.
Right.
And so, and that's a lot of time when I'm in the studio, it's a lot of the frustration and a lot of work. You think you have something pretty well established, and then you put a color next to it, and the relationship changes. And then, you start changing everything else around it. And by the time you get back, it's a whole new painting. So then you have to change everything again.
Yeah. I took a workshop with Brian Mark Taylor. Are you familiar with his work?
No,
Oh, you
at
should
least
look him
not.
up. He's a great landscape painter, and he also does sort of this fantasy sort of made up landscape. Like anyway, you have to check him out. He's a good painter.
What was Jeff? What was his name again?
Brian Mark Taylor. I actually
Oh, yes,
interviewed
yeah,
him.
I actually do know him. He made a great little Pashad box
Yeah,
that,
yeah, Strata.
yeah,
Yeah,
that
that's him.
it's what I use when I'm out in the field. It's
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's a sharp
so
guy.
I am familiar with his work. Yeah.
Well, I took a workshop from him many years ago, and see, I'm so thick-headed because when you're talking about these color charts, it reminds me of this one thing I learned. I mean, I learned a lot from him, but this one thing I learned from him, it reminded me of, and this, I had cad red light on my palette, and I also had vermilion because he asked me to bring vermilion. But he showed me how if you mix cad red light with ultramarine blue, it makes this sort of cruddy violet that's got no chroma. But if you mix vermilion with ultramarine blue, it makes this beautiful violet. But cad red and vermilion sitting next to each other on the palette, they almost look identical. You can hardly tell them apart. It seems like it defies science, like it defies, reality, but that's how it works. So I should have concluded from that, well, maybe I should do this with all my colors and figure out what can and can't be done. But no, I just carried that one nugget for 10 years. So I appreciate all of this information for my thick skull.
Well, besides that, I have mine taped off and stuff, but they're just so much fun to do. I
Are
mean,
they
for me,
really?
there's
I gotta
nothing
try this.
there's nothing more fun to me than just mixing paint, just
Really?
plain. Um, and they take a little time because I grit them off and measure them off and tape them with you because I know I'm gonna use them a lot, so I want them to be consistent.
Right.
Um, but I look at it that they've become my visual dictionary, and I use it. I think much like an author would the English dictionary.
And how many of
It,
these do you have? It would seem with 14 colors, you would have a ton of them.
I probably have, if I had to guess, maybe 35. I don't, maybe not 40 yet, but as I say, I'll see a color that a cool name, video blue. I think, wow, that sounds like a great color. And then, and I have used it a couple times, but I haven't used it much because it just doesn't fit for the most part. There's more, it doesn't mesh necessarily with the colors that I think are kind of what I'm most familiar with and my strength. But I wouldn't know that unless I had made one of these charts and see how it works. I mean,
Hmm.
I had dioxazine mauve on my palette for a long time. And I still think it's a pretty neat color, but it has so much strength. And when I did these colors, cobalt violet was one of the. I think, God, that just sounds like a great color. And so
Mm-hmm.
I got cobalt violet and made a chart, and I thought, oh my God, this color is so much more me than dioxazine mauve is because of the subtleties and the nuances that draws me to so much of the work that I admire, either contemporary or historic paintings, and the range of cobalt violet is it's just such a subtler color than dioxazine mauve. And
Hmm.
so I took, and I had dioxazine mauve on my palette for, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly.
I
I'm
don't
not
know.
sure.
I don't use that color. Yeah.
But, I had it on my palette for probably 12 or 15, maybe even 18 years.
Hmm.
But once I made one of these, the color chart with cobalt violet, it just resonated with me much more. And every once in a while, I'll reach and there'll be a gray that I had mixed with dioxazine mauve that, so I still have a tube of it laying around, but I
Hmm.
use cobalt violet much more.
So I'm confused though, because 40 doesn't seem like very many. If you've got 14 colors, and that would be 14 times 14, isn't that like
Well,
196?
no, because so each color, each chart is like this is my let's see if we can see the whole chart. This is my yellow ochre chart. So, it has all these mixtures on it. And then I have one for each one of these rows. The vertical rows is a color.
Oh, so you have each color mixed with each other color. So technically you would only need 14 then.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So
And
40,
again,
40s with a lot of extra colors then. You've
yeah.
done with other colors that aren't even on your palette.
Yeah. Or not the standard colors on my palette.
Right. Yeah, I was going back to that whole idea of a whole chart with two colors again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is I think a good place to start your work. Let's check out some of your art here. All right. I had mentioned your house paintings, and I'm going to start with those because they kind of blow my mind. One of the things that I just love about your work is the moodiness of it. I mean, you have some paintings. I'm going to go back here and compare it. Like, take a good look for the audience. Take a good look at these subtle, it's minimal color. It looks like a limited palette almost. And then you compare that to, say, this one or this one that are very high chroma. That's the one thing I notice about your work is you've just got this huge, you have this harmony and this consistency from piece to piece, and at the same time, you're broad in your palette on your paintings.
Oh, thank you. It's that first piece you brought up. I think it was titled "Winter's Walk." That one. That's I'm about 5 feet from my. I have a. This is our place in Maine, and I'm about 5 feet from the front step of my studio, which is detached from the house, walking back toward the house.
Mm.
And so when my wife and I moved there, we had 2 children at the time, our 2 oldest, Rosie and Nat. I had, grew up in the West. I traveled quite a bit, but I had no idea what it took to create a New England farm. And so we built the house and the studio at the same time, and it was just on a, scarred, leveled piece of dirt and rocks. And coming from the West, it never dawned on me that we bought property in Rockland and the next town over is Rockport, or we bought property in Rockport and our neighboring town is Rockland, that there might be a few rocks and, that don't exist in Wyoming. But so we built a house and studio, and then I did all the gardening. And so, everything that you can see in this piece, I either planted or built or helped design. I didn't build the house, but I built the picket fence and cut all the firewood and planted all the plants in the garden. So
wow,
this is just a regular commute. I think there's another one on the.
Do you still own this home?
Yeah, yes, we do.
So do you? But you live in Wyoming as well, so you go back and forth.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
So there's one farther down. I think that's the same. It's the bigger piece called the Welcoming Committee.
Oh my gosh, your work is mind blowing.
That one, you just had your finger on it. It's in the third row up.
Oh, right here.
That's the same exact scene.
Oh my gosh.
I'm standing actually on my the step of my studio looking back, and this is called the Welcoming Committee, where we had the little
cute
Jack
dog.
Russell,
Yeah.
my dog, and then if you look closely, our son that is 23 now there's a little silhouette of him standing in the door.
Oh yeah.
Waiting for
God, it makes me kind of nauseated looking at this. I'm like, because I'm so depressed. It's so depressing. I don't know how you do it. It's so convincing and it's so representative of real life and yet so much better. Like I've never seen a photo that beautiful.
So then you can see that the house we originally had was kind of this off, kind of muted yellow. And then in that first one we saw, the garden has grown up quite a bit more, and we've repainted the house white to, in New England, it seems like you have to paint your house every 5 years. It's just that
the
moisture.
It's
rough. But anyway.
Yeah, I love that you just, as a side note, I love that you built an old style house out there. That's really cool.
Yeah.
All right, I wanted to point out something else I saw right here. This is that one you were talking about earlier, right?
Yes, this was the third and final one of that wasp nest that I had mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I should have pulled that up earlier. That's beautiful. I calculated when you were talking, you said 3 weeks, approximately 3 weeks each. So you put in almost about 2.5 months on just this project.
Yeah, it's probably closer to 3 or a little over 3 months for the 3 drawing.
Did at any point your wife come in and say, "Shouldn't you be making money?" Or did you?
Actually, I'd sold all 3 of those. So
no, I figured you did, but I mean, I would have been nervous to go to just sit there and draw beehives for 3 months. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, here's one I saw on Instagram recently that really caught my eye. Is this in Wyoming?
This is in Maine. This is up in Union, Maine, and I was with a friend of mine named Don Demers, who is a fabulous painter, and Don he's a great. What he can do plein air, it just blows my mind. I mean, he can have fully finished paintings on the spot, and they're fairly tight. They're not loosely painted. And the other thing, he can talk nonstop while he's painting in a full conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And when I start to paint, I might as well be mute. I mean, I mumble, but when I'm teaching a workshop,
mumble and drool, and
I'm talking, coherently, but about 1 out of every 6 words is audible, and the rest is going on in my mind. I just forget to say them. So people are standing there like, "What the hell is he talking about?" So I was out with Don, and I were on this location, and we'd just gotten there, and I got a phone call, and I just started a thumbnail. I had my 2 legs of my easel set up, and I had to go back to the house, which is about 8-9 miles away, and to unload some stuff. I had a delivery coming in, so by the time I got everything unloaded and got back, Don had, he was just about finished with his painting, so I had just enough time to kind of make some notes, do a thumbnail sketch, and then I did this in the studio from it. And what really struck me was the light moving from the left side of the canvas as across. There were a lot of times I'll expand that field of vision, where the trees in that upper left-hand corner are more backlit or partially lit than they were in reality. They'd be that another 100 feet out of the picture plane, but I'll bring that in. And then as you go from left to right, I'll enhance those and made those trees almost totally front lit, where I'll condense that, or I'll expand that field of vision going, I call it lateral perspective instead of aerial perspective.
Wait, can you explain that again? I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. I'm
So
sure.
if we're just looking at this scene, the way I have it, you don't get to see a lot of that. But if you turn your head and go, the light's coming from my left side,
right?
And if you turn your head and go maybe 10 degrees outside of the picture plane, all those trees become more, backlit or
right, because you're essentially seeing a half circle if you turn your head.
Right. And so a lot of times I'll expand my picture plane and kind of bring what's 10 to 15 degrees outside of my viewing plane of what I have on my canvas, and I'll bring certain elements of that in to kind of try to enhance the feeling of light.
Whoa, okay, that's bizarre. I have never heard of that. Did you kind of come up with that on your own?
Well, I think a lot of times when I'm teaching or a workshop, I mean, most painters, unless they're really rank beginners, most painters understand aerial perspective.
Right.
But I think a lot of painters, even some advanced painters, don't pay enough attention, in my opinion, to what, and I don't know if there's a term, I call it lateral perspective of that. If we do a 180 degree outside, the difference in that span of 180 degrees is vastly different from backlit to front lit. And so I'm always aware of that. And so a lot of times I'll exaggerate that and bring that into the painting.
And
so this is a relatively closely cropped vision, and there wouldn't be a lot of difference in those background trees. But I intentionally made that upper left-hand corner more backlit. They're more violet. The light's kind of coming through, and they're slightly darker. And then as we go from the left corner to the right side of the canvas, I've made them more front lit than they
gosh.
were in reality.
I've never heard of that.
Hoping to enhance that sense of sunlight.
And I mean, is that okay? So that's one of the things about your paintings that kind of blows my mind is how real the light is. It's like when you're looking at a sunny painting and it's almost like you can feel the heat coming from the painting.
Yeah.
It's that convincing. Would you say that that is part of the reason that you're able to capture this feeling of light?
I think that helps. I'd like to think of that it helps. It's everything that we do is it's an illusion. I mean, we're trying to create this, you know, depth of a 3 degree, even in an interior or a still life on a relatively flat surface. I guess it's not perfectly flat because we have the weave of the depth of the canvas, but for argument sense, we're trying to create illusion on a flat surface,
Right.
and so we can't paint exactly what we see because what we're seeing is a three-dimensional, big, wide open space, and so you have to paint more of the feeling of what you're doing. So I think by being aware of that lateral perspective will help landscapes, whether it's just a foreground field where it's part of it's half lit or backlit, and then you come around to more quarter lit on the front lit side, or you could push it all the way to the front lit.
So these trees on the corner, they might actually be side lit, but what you're doing is you're looking off to the left and saying, oh, the ones on the left, because they're on that curve based on, my
Yeah.
neck swiveling, right? They're more backlit. So I'm going to bring the lighting from the trees on the left and bring them into the picture frame.
Yes.
So you're painting the objects within your field of view, but you're expanding your field of view for lighting.
I'm expanding my field of vision to enhance that, hopefully enhance that lighting.
It's crazy.
So if you go to those are all white pine. If you had your pointer on that white pine on the edge of the canvas,
Yeah.
and then the ones right behind the farmhouse.
Oh, right here. Yeah, they're totally different.
If those, so the ones on the edge of the canvas are, 3/4 backlit.
Mm-hmm.
They're hardly, and then the ones behind the house are kind of half and half.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way they would, but those trees on the edge of the canvas would be, 10 degrees outside of the picture plane.
Right.
But I just, I used that to kind of enhance, and then.
What? I don't understand how you came up with that. That's wild. That's the first I've ever heard of anything like that. Can you show that to me in another painting?
Yeah, let's see. This one, the light is coming from the right side. And so the little sagebrush in the foreground in the lower right-hand corner, those little accents would probably be, 5, because this is primarily the sun's kind of behind my right shoulder.
Right.
So those little accents, the shadow side of that sagebrush in the lower right-hand corner of that would probably be, 5 degrees outside the picture plane.
Oh.
And then there would be a few more accents on the sagebrush over on the left-hand side, a little shadow that I've eliminated or taken sagebrush that might be, 10 degrees outside the picture plane, where it's almost totally front lit, to try to enhance that. And some of that is a conscious feeling or a conscious decision. Others is just a feeling. I didn't want to have any really sharp accents in the foreground that would compete or take away from the shadow side of those sandstone rocks.
I want to look at this one again, small, because it's amazing to me how refined it looks when it's small. And like
Yeah.
you talk about, this looks like sagebrush and looks like sagebrush, but then when you look closely at it, there's just a few marks. They're just little
It
strokes,
just,
which, you know, we all know as painters, but, you know, you kind of geek out over that stuff. Okay, so here's another one. I was driving home from California and I saw a scene similar to this, and I could not capture it, like I said before, with my camera. It's just the lighting is so sophisticated in that. Can you tell me a little bit about how you created this one?
well, clouds, I'm kind of envious of people who paint clouds really well. This one I struggle with and struggle with and struggle with. Um,
I think they're
there are a couple,
incredible.
there, but and a lot of it is just the tonality. That the whole basis of this was trying to. The clouds were really moving quickly, and to try
Hmm.
to capture that movement in the clouds. And I think I titled this "Cloud Dance" because they really were dancing against the kind of static, um, stationary, everything in the foreground, and everything on the ground was solid and non-moving. Everything in the sky was almost liquid, and the wind was blowing quite hard.
Mm-hmm.
I struggled with this painting for about 6 months, and I ended up cutting 5 inches off the bottom of my panel, um,
Wait, I'm confused.
because I did.
The clouds are moving, but you worked on it for 6 months. Did you keep going back?
Oh, the layering and the I bet the paint was 3/8 of an inch thick on some. And this was a studio piece,
Oh,
almost
okay. Okay. So you just wanted the
almost
feeling of moving,
1,000.
but your reference
Yeah,
obviously wasn't moving.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Okay. Yeah. It's an incredible sense of light. Um, yeah, same with, oh gosh, man, I don't know how you do this. So there was one that you had done, I'm gonna go, I think it's up at the top, where you, oh no, this is it right here, where I was noticing that's not that big of a painting. It's 3 feet, a little over 3 by 2 feet.
Yeah.
Um, but you have an incredible level of detail on the paneling, or what do you call this? And I can't remember what you call this. I grew up in the East.
Priorities.
What's that?
The Priorities is the title of it,
No, but
which,
what do you call the paneling on a house like this?
just a clapboard
Yeah, clapboard.
house.
Okay. Yeah, I even grew up in a house like this. I don't remember what it's called. Yeah, but the detail on that is unbelievable.
This painting, this house struck me. It has so many different aspects of architecture. None of them, you know, are natural or go inside. It's got some stained glass windows, kind of Art Nouveau.
So
Um,
bizarre.
it's got that, the kind of the frilly grill work of a Victorian house on it, a little bit on the porch and up in the eave. Uh, they had a weird roof line, and the house, the light struck me on the house. It's obviously in need of a paint job. It's in central Texas, so there's no foundation. It's just built on blocks, but the skirting has come off, the lath skirting, and the house is in need of repair, but they have their satellite dish,
I
I
know.
guarantee, in working order. And I was explaining this painting to my father-in-law. He was always curious of what I was working on. I was telling him, I just said, called him Pop, and I said, it's just, it's, I'm fascinated by it. The porch looks like it could fall off from the front of the house or fall away from the front of the house at any minute. It's listing, it's at a weird angle. And I said, but they had their satellite dishes there. And I said, so you know what their priorities are?
I
And
know.
he said,
That's what I
that's
was
what,
thinking.
and I said, what? And he said, priorities. And I thought, you're right. So he gets credit for titling that one.
I'm glad you thought that, because I often think that when I see houses like this. I'm like, if you put away that $50 a month and the hundreds of hours a month you watch the TV, Buy some
It's
sheets of
exactly
plywood and
right.
fix your house, man.
Exactly.
Jeez
Yeah.
Louise. Anyway, I shouldn't be
So,
so
so this
judgmental.
is, Jeff, if you go back to that one, this is another thing that,
Okay.
living in mid-coast Maine in what they call Wyeth country, this is something that I've learned from looking at Andrew Weiss' work a great deal is, I intentionally darken the foreground, which is just kind of a dry stubble grass, really couldn't even call it a lawn. But Andrew Wyeth will paint a foreground, that's 4 or 5 values darker than it ever could be in reality.
Mm.
But he does it to enhance that sense of sunlight on the house. It's because the spectrum of light is far greater than the spectrum of pigment that we use to try to depict light. And so, since we can't copy, sunlight on Earth verbatim, we have to make choices. And it's what living in Maine for the number of years that I have, it's what I see the people who try to copy Wyeth, they miss two things. The painters that are trying to copy him will paint every clapboard on the side of the house. But if you really look at an Andrew Wyeth, he paints very few of them. He just gives you the suggestion that he's painted every one of them. But if you
Yeah.
really look at them, they're just hinted. So that's one thing that I think people who are trying to copy him. The other thing is how dark he'll paint a foreground and get it to still read like a sunlit painting. So one of the very first things that probably the first thing I make my decision when I'm starting a painting is if it's a high keyed painting, your eye or the viewer's eye will go immediately to the darker than areas, like that sagebrush
They
and that
will.
sunlit
I would have
cliff.
thought they'd go to the lighter.
No, they go to the minority of what's
Oh,
there.
right, because it's a high
And
key
so
painting. Right, right.
the opposite is true with a dark painting. If you have a low key painting, your eye will go to the lighter elements within that painting
Right, right.
first. And so I wanted the house to be the subject matter here. So I've intentionally grayed the sky a little bit, and maybe dropped it slightly in value, but I've definitely darkened the foreground, probably a full value or a value and a half in that, trying to enhance that sunlight on that not so white house because it was definitely in need of a paint job. But
Right.
um,
Which is what makes it interesting
that
subject.
I'm thinking of. I'm sorry.
Which is what makes it an interesting subject. If it was a perfectly clean, well-kept house, it might not be this interesting. Although the ones of
Yeah.
your house are very interesting. So it depends on who's painting it. But then, so here's a question I have. So when you darken the foreground, though, it still feels like the house is inside the space, like back behind the picture plane.
Yeah.
What do you do when you've darkened the foreground in order to make the foreground still be in front of the midground?
I think in this case, I just simplified it. I didn't put any detail or anything in it. So there's nothing for the eye there's nothing to call the eye to the foreground, or hopefully little.
Oh,
And
man.
so your eye will move right past it to the higher contrast of the lighter house with the darker windows.
Right. Yeah, and then to your point about detail, because I had mentioned how it's almost like you painted every clapboard, but you're missing lines everywhere. But you painted this shadow edge of the edge trim on every edge, and that almost tells the entire story
Yeah.
of the clapboard. Yeah, man, that's cool. Um, okay, man, there's just too many I want to talk about. Let's see. Is this here's one that's probably in Wyoming.
Yeah, I think that was right up. I think that may have been right on the Montana or Wyoming-Montana border.
And that's a
Um,
fairly small, that's not that small, 18 by 20. Is this one a studio painting as well?
yeah,
It is.
yeah,
Yeah. And one thing that's really incredible is that they really are loose and abstract. So I got to look at that again. So
You know,
that
that
that doesn't that doesn't look like it has all that detail. When you zoom out, it's like you can see inside the trees and into the bush, into the branches. And then when you look closely at it, it's just a bunch of marks. So in your studio, are
that
you really stepping way back a lot to see?
stepping back and and really layering, texturing the work. And that you mentioned that it was really abstract. That's probably the highest compliment you can give me because I guess people would call this my work representational for lack of a better title for it. But when I'm working on it, I think I'm almost in complete abstract qualities. Light, dark value pattern throughout the canvas, where I want to have contrast or lack of contrast in certain areas. Different shapes of the snow patterns within this piece that we're looking at is, far different than what was there in reality.
Yeah.
So, a lot of times I hear music or rhythms that, would occur more in music than in painting, but I think of music when I'm trying to design these and when I'm working on
Yeah. Yeah, they're
them.
clearly well designed. You're obviously thinking about that, but I think about that's how you described Antonio Lopez Garcia's work. How when you see it in person, it's so abstract, but when you
Yeah.
see it reduced down to a little tiny page, it's so realistic. And I'm getting the exact same thing from your work. I thought that I'm going to say this. I say this not meaning literally, but it's
Yeah.
almost like so detailed, like photorealism at this scale. None of your work looks like a photo. It's far better than any photo, but I hope you understand my point. The level
Yeah.
of detail that you see in a thumbnail, it's like, whoa. And then you blow it up and it's like, what? No way.
Yeah.
It's totally abstract.
I have to say that I was glad that you mentioned your admiration and respect for Wayne Thiebaud because a couple of the portraits I've seen of your work particularly with some of your group commission, or I'm assuming commission portraits
Yeah,
of
yeah.
families. I see a lot of Thiebaud influence in there, and I mean that in the highest form of
No,
compliment.
there's no doubt. The way I abstract the shadows and stuff, totally a Thiebaud influence. I loved what he would do with shadows in his paintings.
And that vibrating line around the edge,
Yeah.
which I've heard, I believe it's called an Apelles line or a bedbug line.
Oh, I've never heard
Um,
those things. Yeah.
uh, Don Demers was telling me the story, and then I went out and looked it up a little bit, and it was from a fourth century Greek named who was an artist in his studio, and another artist called, and if I think I have this right, and the artist wasn't there, so the visiting artist walked up to the canvas and put a line on his canvas, and his studio assistant said, "You had a visitor," and the artist said, "Who was it?" And he said, "I don't know, I don't remember name or God." And he walked into his studio and he said, "Oh, I know who it was. It was Apelles." And I think I'm pronouncing that correctly because there's nobody else that could put such a fine line right on that vibration. But it took me years to see that outside,
Hmm.
and I see it. Now I see it all the time. It's most easily seen, in evening, where you get that vibration against the landmass in the sky. You'll have that. A lot of times, it's a complementary color. Um,
And
but
so you apply that in your work as well?
yeah,
Speaking of
if
Wayne
you put
Thiebaud,
on,
this is, yeah, those blue shadows, right? I love how he uses that.
And if you clicked on this one and we could enlarge it, there's a little orange vibration
Yep,
or that
right around the
highlights
edge
my
of each shadow.
um, so I think one of the easiest ones to see, Jeff, if we go back, there's a road one, I think, right above this one. That if we click on that, you can see that that orange line against that dirt field right there.
And you see
And
that in nature. You actually see that.
you really start to see it. It took me years to see it, and I never saw it when I was actually doing plein air painting. And it wasn't until I stopped painting outside and I would sit and look and start taking notes that I first saw that, which was much later in my career than it should have taken me to see it.
Hmm.
But to me, that's one of the advantages of just going out and observing in the field rather than painting in the field. I really think that I see more, I observed more just being out than when I was out trying to paint.
So do you actually make it a point to have outings where you just look for stuff and take notes and that's it?
Most of the time.
Really?
When I'm in the field, I almost always have a sketchbook with me, though I do have, gas receipts and, I've had drawings, compositional drawings and thumbnails on the back of a napkin or the side of a paper cup when I have forgot my sketchbook. But
so this one, again, it's incredible lighting. I mean, it's again, one of those complex lighting situations that you really pulled off. I'm assuming this one's in Maine as well?
Yeah, this is looking in the town of Rockport, looking down into Rockport Harbor.
Yeah. And is this one also one that you took notes and then came back in the studio, I would assume?
Yeah, and this one was just, this is about 3.5 or 4 miles from where the house is. And so that was done all in the studio, and I had photographic reference on that. But a lot of times I go back and just park there at that time of day and wait.
I just love your houses. I think that's my favorite subject that you paint because you take such ordinary things and make them art. I mean, what a weird house.
These are strange houses. These houses are known as there was a coal mine right in the northern Wyoming, southern Montana border, right on the Wyoming-Montana border. It's no longer in existence anymore. There are big coal mines there, but this was a smaller coal mine called Coy Coal. And there are a number of these houses that they moved from the mine when it closed into town. And a lot of them have been added on to, or they'll put a little porch on it and changes. But they're square houses with this certain roof, and they have this look. And I was working on a series of paintings of Sheridan called entitled the exhibition Hometown. They were all small format, I think 10, 12 inches was the largest, and a lot of them. And they were all done in the studio, but I tried to paint them like I did plein air. And I was out one morning about 5 o'clock in the morning and came across this house. And I was aware of how Christmas lights came to represent the birth of Jesus. But to this day, for the life of me, I have no idea how 8-foot inflatable plastic, lawn ornaments represent. And so when I saw this house, the 1981 Talking Head song, Letting the Days Go By, just popped into my head, with those great lyrics. This is not my beautiful wife. This is not my beautiful. How did we get here? And so I titled that. I was so excited. I came right into the studio and started to block in a little composition, at 6:15 in the morning. And I finished the little, it's an 8.5 by 10 or something, 10.25 panel. And I was so excited I had a panel made up that was the same proportion. And so I set the study aside and started to block this in. And about the time my wife came in, she has an office in the front part of the studio. She came in and I had it, started to block in and started, you got the sense of it. And I showed her the study and she said, oh, you should put that in the Prix to West exhibit in Oklahoma City, which is typical cowboys and Indians. And I kind of laughed at her and thought, no way in hell I'm putting that in that exhibition. Over the months that I worked on this bigger piece, I thought, why not? This is as real, if not more, true Western. I mean, Sheridan, Wyoming is a Western town, and everything about this is authentic. And so I did put it in the show, and it won an award, and it was fun to kind of step back because you get people. Some people came up and loved it, and then you get people that come in and they just kind of scratch their head and lift their cowboy hat and say, "What's this doing in the show?" So it was kind of fun.
Yeah, and that's an interesting. Whoops, I don't want to lose
back.
That's an interesting topic in and of itself. It's sometimes frustrating for me when, and I get it. My own mother's this way. Like when clients and or collectors are more interested in subject matter than composition and emotion and mood. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I'm not surprised that a lot of people scratch their head because it's not a cowboy on a horse. Right. But to me, go ahead.
You think of the window of the time, in the history of the Rocky Mountain West, that phase of cowboy on a horse is just it's a tiny little window.
It is.
And it doesn't exist anymore. I mean, there are still ranches out here, but, most of them are on four-wheelers or side-by-sides. And a couple of them still ride horses every now and then, but I don't know of any working ranch where they're solely on horseback.
Yeah, that would be interesting because there's a lot. I mean, Western art is blowing up right now, and most of it is horses and cowboys and this nostalgic painting, these nostalgic paintings of the past. It'd be interesting to see an artist pop up that actually has people on quads and driving their tractors and, the tools that or pickup trucks, the tools that they're actually using. It'd be interesting to see if someone could make a career out of that.
So one of I knew the conscious when I was working on this one that, again, we've talked about the limitations of pigment compared to the limitations or the spectrum of light. Our range of pigment is, a fraction of what the spectrum of light is. So I knew I had to keep everything grayed down. I couldn't have any bright color if I wanted to have room or have range to try to paint the illumination or feeling of illumination of those colored lights. And so everything, from the snow to the color of the house to the snowman, even the trees, I couldn't have any bright color anywhere to hopefully create a stage that would allow those lights to appear luminous.
So how do you achieve that? My assumption is that you paint the whole painting first and then put the lights on after, correct?
They were, I think I had a corner of it right above that snowman that I had, and I indicated a couple, lights that to see if I could have enough range of how dark I needed to go. And then I just kind of worked on and built out from there.
But when you're painting the house, without the lights in the beginning, do you literally take colors off your palette? I mean, or are you just mixing grays?
On this one, I think I did a combination of both. I took all when I minus the lights, I took all the cadmiums and kind of high chroma colors off my palette, and I use a couple to mix grays also.
So what was a palette you might have used for this? I obviously might not remember, but if you were to do it again,
I think I had a cobalt blue on there. I think this is one where I used cobalt violet with a lot of earth colors or terre vert.
Hmm.
None of the colors on here, minus the outside the lights, were high chroma colors.
Okay. Huh. But you're not using black then?
Um, I use, I have black. Actually, I have three blacks on my palette.
Really?
I have ivory black, I have Mars black, and I have what was the other one? Uh, black, lamp black.
No
Um,
kidding. Three blacks.
and because they're Mars or ivory black is a fairly warmish neutral compared to lamp black, which is really a cold blue black.
Hmm.
And so, I'll use. I think I think the difference, people say I don't have black on my palette, because I think they'll get lazy and they think of it as a value instead of a color. And blacks can make some of the most beautiful grays.
Do you make charts with your blacks too?
Yeah. Let me just see if I have it, if I can grab one. Hold on. Again, I don't know if it's bright enough that we can see, but this is an ivory black
Okay.
chart, which
Yeah. Yeah. That one's, you can definitely see something.
beautiful. Maybe if I turn it sideways, really can't see that. But you get some beautiful grays and nuances, and then this is a lamp black, which you can see is considerably cooler.
Hmm.
And again, they don't. You can't see the.
You
The
can see a
subtlety.
difference though, big time. That's a
Yeah,
much bluer
this
sheet.
one's much cooler than lamp black, or I'm sorry, than ivory black. That second one was the lamp black one.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. And how many blacks will you use in one painting? Or do you just
oh,
pick one?
no, sometimes I'll play, the cool of the lamp black against the warm of a ivory black but I usually use the blacks on the lighter spectrum than on a darker. I think you can mix a more interesting dark than just a black.
Mm. Well,
Um,
that's a good piece of advice right there.
yeah.
Yeah, because I think that's why a lot of artists avoid black, because black seems to kill the shadows a little bit.
Yeah, and I think if you think of black as a value, you should probably stay away from using it. But if you think of it as I use black more in my lighter and my higher uh, keys
Mm-hmm.
I do in the darker ones.
Oh, that's great.
And
That's great advice.
they have a mixed black or a mixed dark. I think it has much more life than just black out of the tube.
Oh, man. Okay, so
This is
tell me about this one.
this is part of that hometown series that I did, which I was asked by our local art guild if I would like to have a show, and I kind of felt obligated to do it, but I wasn't. Started off, I wasn't all that excited about it,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't quite sure what I did. But we had recently had come back from Maine, and we were in. I have this great historic studio in downtown Maine, and so I thought, I'm intrigued by some of the architecture in around Sheridan, and so I told him I thought I could have 12 to 15 paintings it was a year and a half away that we scheduled it. And I ended up with 35 of them.
Wow.
And they were just, I would get up and I'd walk around from the studio. I'd get up early in the morning and drive around town. I was in neighborhoods that I hadn't been in since I was, 9 or 10 years old, playing baseball. But you can see that Pellis line right at the edge of the shadow
I
on this
know.
one
I
too.
was going to point that out. Yeah, right here.
But,
Yep.
so,
And it really livens up a shadow, or at least,
and when you're aware of it and you start to look for it, I mean, you really see it all the time. Um,
yeah. Yeah, and these blues and the snow, violets, it's more violet, I guess, than blue. Just so chromatic. Imagine when painting something like this, if you're not experienced, you almost be like, no, it can't be. Can't be that, it can't be that purple.
But,
Yeah, it's
and then a
incredible.
lot of times, again, this is where some of the color charts come in handy because you have that warmth of that, reflected light on that white or slightly off-white building. And then, I can glance down at a couple of my cooler charts and say, which which of these, blue violet, gray violet, bluish gray, um, works best with this before. And so I have an idea before I even paint it what the color combinations may be.
I'd like to see one of these sketches with the notes on them, what they look like. Do you have any of those laying around?
This is just, a typical thumbnail that,
Okay.
I might do in the field. Uh,
Okay.
that was one on location. This is one uh, that has the
Look at
the
that.
markings and the call outs. So, I'll write things like warm cerulean, greenish blue sky, warm white, yellow white, bright as snow. It's cooler than but neutral gray, slightly darker than the hillside and the fingers of the snow on there. Um, Pinkish orange, warm hillside, play patterns within the hill. And then, some of them, I think there's a one on that selected pages of called the yard feeding time. And that's, so this might be the very first inspirational. It's just trying to get thoughts down of movement of sheep. So that's the thumbnail for this finished piece here.
Wow. Do you have notes for that one?
I don't. I think I had some notes written in a different
Oh,
sketchbook.
okay.
Maybe not my color call out notes,
Right, right.
but my thoughts on it. And a lot of times I'll try to I'll write things that say subtle temperature shifts in the foreground or um, to create the. I ended up doing a number of gesture drawings with the sheep that are in my flat file. If we take another break, I don't know how long you want me babbling on, but
This is great.
and then what I actually ended up doing is scaled them down on our printer, and
Mm-hmm.
I out and moved them around I just would tape them to the panel until I had them in a kind of the grouping that I
Oh, that's
wanted them.
great.
Because I had
Man.
the box in the foreground, more than blocked in, but it wasn't finished. And then I decided to add the sheep in. Well, knew I was going to add the sheep in from the beginning, but that's the way I did it. Which, for me uh, to try to draw one in proportion and then not have it be in the right spot and paint it out and try to move it a quarter inch or
Oh, yeah. Total
80,
waste of time.
it's a waste of time. And
Yeah.
I've done the drawings and used some of the technology that we have to. I just reduced them down into the right scale, and then once I had them all in, and then I drew them in
Oh, a lot
on
of
the
artists do
canvas.
that in Photoshop now. You haven't tried that?
Now I've had a couple friends come by and show me that they're really painting in Photoshop. It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. I'm
But
going to be interviewing David Dibble in a couple weeks, and that's his thing. Do you know David Dibble's work?
yeah, he is one of the nicest guys in the
Yeah,
business.
he's almost too nice. It's like, how can you be
And
so nice? Yeah,
his work, I mean, what he's able to do in that Photoshop is mind-boggling.
I know. Yeah, it's
I
incredible.
mean,
I'm looking forward to that one. Yeah, and I'm not much of a Photoshop guy. I mean, I use it occasionally, but so I'm looking forward to learning a little more about that too. But I have a question for you about lighting again. So when I was looking at this painting, and I wish I could put them next to each other, so the audience is just going to have to remember it, but this is so bright. It's almost like walking outside of a dark house. on an August or July day. You know that feeling like you can't even open your eyes? And you've
Yeah.
really captured that feeling. And then by contrast, there's this painting where it's clearly sunny because you have hard shadow edges, but it's this subdued sort of moody light quality. So tell me a little bit about that. I mean, about your thought process. Like, how do you move, or why did you choose to go really bright, sunny here, and then another painting that's obviously sunny, but it's subdued and moody? Tell me a little bit about your creative process there.
But if we go back to that first one, I was part of an exhibition a number of years ago called Sea to Shining Sea,
Yeah.
and traveled out to the Hagen Museum in California. And over the weekend, they hosted us at this wonderful winery, and they had this white barn that they used, I think, to store a lot of the barrels in. And I was fascinated by all the different nuances of healing paint and the layers of the whites on this barn. And this is one where I did a little on the spot piece. And it was 6x8 or 8x7, something like that, very quickly, late in the afternoon, and brought it back in the studio. And this is a piece that my whole thing was how many non-whites can I paint to make this white on the side of the barn? There's vertical barn, and then that little doorway in the middle of it's kind of sloped back, so it's picking up a little cooler white, and then play the abstract shadow. So I wanted to really simplify everything else, the barn and the cropping and everything. And I struggled with this piece for a long time because in reality there was a tree on the left side of the barn, and it's kind of a big, I can't remember what tree it was, but a full leaf, big dominant shape, and I had it in my study. So I actually had it in the painting for a long time, and I thought, it's not working right. So I thought, well, I'll move it over to the right side of the painting where it's not quite centered, and maybe that would offset it a little more. And then literally after spending 4, 5, 6 days painting the tree on the left and then painting it again on the right, I started to ask myself, what's that tree say about the trying to paint the whites of the barn? And it dawned on me, like, it's not saying anything. So the minute I took it out and painted it out, I thought the painting was a little stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were raising chickens. We had chickens all the time we were in Maine. And about 6 months into this painting, I thought, I wonder if I can paint my giant white chickens and a couple of the buff Orpingtons. If I could still have range to paint a white chicken in there and still make the barn look white. So again, a lot of it's that abstract thought or process that I see as total abstraction, even though it's somewhat representational. So this was, I spent a lot of time kind of scumbling, sanding. I actually take a hard lead pencil and draw some of the vertical boards in this, and then let it dry and paint over that. And there are layers and layers of paint on that, as well as the foreground.
And it's not small. It's 28 by 28. That's pretty good
Yeah.
size painting. Yeah,
So I think a lot. So and then so I just go out and I do drawings of my chickens as they walk around the yard, and then try to group them and again put them in it where they're, I think of them as almost notes of music going across, where I pay more attention, or I'm aware of the negative spaces in between the chickens and grouping the chickens, and where hopefully it feels natural,
it
but
does.
it's
Yeah,
not static or anything.
it does.
And
It
then
feels really natural.
we go to that second one you mentioned, which is titled November Sun, which I just had this piece. It was one of the paintings I had, one of the 3 paintings I had at the Maxwell Alexander 10th year anniversary exhibition last month in LA. So this is in central, kind of south central Wyoming. One of my favorite things to do is to get off the highways and even the secondary roads and drive a lot of these back dirt roads through the western states, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, Arizona, Nevada. I have the big gazetteer maps for all the states. And I was coming by this barn, and I love the shape of the barn, first off, and it, white clapboard with that cement foundation. And then the key, and again, there are a whole bunch of big cottonwood trees behind this barn that.
Oh, there were. Really?
Yeah, I kind of learned from my first lesson of doing the giant white barn. That, all right, those trees aren't necessary. So I didn't, even from the very beginning, I didn't put them in. And I wanted to have that feeling of kind of that late fall, early winter, November, where the sun still, when you get a good sunny day, it still has some warmth in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tried to, this was one that I intentionally, I think that the dormer on the barn in reality it was tin also, and it was rusted, and I wanted to take, or it may have even been wooden, but I wanted to make that white to relate it more to the barn. But the part that I changed, and I think changed the feeling of this, is I wanted a really kind of muted, warm, neutral sky, not a bright blue sky, to try to enhance that warmth of that low, winter sun or late autumn sun. It's kind of the end of October or beginning of November.
So is that all it is that makes it feel less bright?
And to try to pull all the values, I try to keep the values really close together. Where the first one we showed had much more contrast between the shadow. The sky was probably painted darker than it was in reality, and a much more intense blue than this one. I wanted this one kind of almost a blanket of warmth, of kind of this muted warm. And then this was a old horse of mine that I had my daughter hold for me, and I did a couple drawings of it. And then again, try to paint a white, or in this case, a gray horse against this white barn. And as you know, from painting, which, when you're painting white, whether it's snow or the side of a house or a barn like this, it's really because white is so reflective. It's every color but white.
Right.
I think there's a lick of pure white in any of this. And then I moved the corrals and everything and kind of simplified it.
So how did you come to decide that you wanted it that way? I mean, when you see something the way it is, I just want to know a little more about your creative process. How do you go from painting what you see to changing it to be muted and bringing the values together? I mean, was there a particular mood you were after? Was it more of an abstract decision, just a color decision?
And in this particular case, it was the thing that stood out about me as I was coming back. I was actually returning from a trip to Jackson Hole, and it was just one of those days, that winter is right around the corner, and this might be the last day where that's sun, you feel that warmth. And so that was kind of the whole inspiration of that.
Okay.
There were 2 or 3 horses in this barnyard. One was a bay, and I think they had a dark gray or a black horse. And I can't remember the other one. They may have been a sorrel or another bay. So the horse idea came from, there were horses there, but I thought, again, I didn't want to put a really dark horse against that white, because then it changes that makes it too contrast. So when I got home, this was my horse named Dollar before I sold him.
Wow.
and so I think I had it fairly early on. I knew that if I was going to put a horse on, I knew it was going to be this my horse, this gray horse, against that white barn, and then trying to again simplify areas and bring the values of that foreground. And obviously, there's a pathway that's going through that diagonally through that barnyard that is anybody who's around barnyard, you have a path that animals are, hugely animals of habit, and they'll walk the same route back and forth, so it changes.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to put that in, but I didn't want it to contrast. I also like kind of the lighter part of the hard packed dirt. I thought would relate to the barn a little bit, but so I didn't want to have a lot going on in the foreground, but I wanted to have some to where you get a sense that it's not a manicured, the working barnyard. And then again, the spacing of the fence post, and particularly this one, I think is cropped a tiny bit. There's a little space on that far right side between that leaning telephone or utility pole and the edge of the canvas. So this one's been cropped, quarter so from the reality of the painting. And then a lot of times, if we could blow this up, the tin roof on this barn, I put fairly heavy white pigment, or slightly tinted white pigment, and then I literally took a comb down through it.
Whoa.
And created the thing, and then let that dry. I sand in some areas, and then I can either put scumble some of the rust color and some of the variations of the subtle tonality of that reflected tin over that. But there's actually a ribbing effect in the paint.
Yeah, you can see it. At least I can. Yeah. So that must be where some of that battle you referred to earlier comes from, because you don't really know what you're going to get. It seems like you're doing a lot of experimentation with these textures.
A lot of experimentation, and I did a series. It's probably been about 10 years ago now, where in my studio in Maine, I have a wood stove, and cut all of our own firewood and everything. And as it dries, the bark a lot of times will shrink and come off.
Mm-hmm. And
the hardwoods in Maine, the difference between white oak and red oak and cherry and beech and birch. It's I think far too often one of the things is visual painters, one of the difficulties, at least for me, is to paint to really look in with fresh eyes and not look to what we think we know. We all have a tendency to think sky is blue, grass is green, and in this case, tree trunks are brown. But if you ever really look at a tree trunk, it's just about every color but brown. And so I had it just as an experiment, and I always try to have one or at least one thing going on of just purely experimentational in the studio. And so I decided that I would try to paint I wanted to do one tree bark of a red oak as realistically as I possibly could.
Do you have that here?
I went out. I don't think it's on this.
Oh, okay.
I think it used to be, but it's not on this, on my in this selected work.
Okay.
It's in my growth rings catalog.
We'll put this up as a backdrop.
So I did it just as a portrait painter would, sight size, in my studio. I had it sitting right next to it, right next to the easel. I made my panel the width and height of the piece of. I actually went out and cut a tree and brought it in when it was fresh. And I thought, I'm going to try to do anything I can think of to capture the depth and the nuances and textures. So it was the first time where I really started to just manipulate the paint itself. I was using steel wool, wire brushes, mason's trowels, soft vine charcoal into wet paint. I'd let it dry
Hmm.
and then brush off the residue. I used a lot of sandpaper on it was dry. And the more realistic I tried to paint it, the more abstract it became. And I think Lucian Freud has a saying that's similar to that, right along those lines. That the more realistic something is, the more abstract, ironically, the more abstract it becomes. I have it in my studio in Maine that the more real I try to paint it, the more abstract it becomes, and ironically, the more real,
Hmm.
which is exactly the way it felt. And so that was just a total experimentation on my part. I ended up doing 5 of them. That One different species, and I let the width of the canvas be determined by the width of the tree. But that really changed how, and I incorporate a lot of that technique of manipulating the paint itself on kind of normal and more traditional or normal paintings, where I'm trying to, I hope that they look one way, and you mentioned it online, but if you see one of my paintings from across the room, it may look fairly detailed or representational, but if you get up close from, a foot or 6 inches away, what you thought you were looking at hopefully becomes something completely different. And it's that layered paint and manipulated pigment and a different texture. And at times I think I'm being pretty bold, and then I'll go to an exhibit and see one of George Carlson's work, and then I feel so weak. And
Yeah, well, he might think the same thing about yours. I mean, you're
so,
truly a master. You know, what you said reminds me of something I learned from another artist. He said that I don't remember who, it was years ago, but someone said to me once that your painting should look good from 3 inches away, 3 feet away, and 30 feet away. Not the same, but good. I don't know. And I think you've probably seen paintings as I have where it's like, it looks amazing from 3 feet away or 6 feet away, but then you get up close and it's not interesting,
yeah,
or vice versa.
right.
Um, yeah, and that's one thing that I've noticed about your work is that it's just raw and gritty and abstract from up close, and like you can reach out and touch it when you step back, or at least when I look at it smaller. So tell me about this one. Is this one of those graphite studies?
This is a graphite study. This is, it's called an interior pine. And, being in Maine, white pine they're such a fabulous tree, and they have such an amazing way of growing. Um, they have a main leader that grows, and then every year they send out usually 5 branches in a star pattern. And so on a young white pine tree, you can easily count the growth rings by counting the branches that stem out. Sometimes there are 4. I've seen as many as 7 branches come out, but they always come out at the same spot in the trunk. And then, but it's, they're soft, pines of soft wood. They have these long needles that are in clusters, which hold that heavy New England snow. So a lot of times the leader will break off, and then they'll have the dominant branch will come and take over that leader. And it gives them this wonderful, graceful rhythm. And when they're out in the field, you'll see it. And Andrew Wyeth could paint a white pine tree they're just exquisitely beautiful because he
Mm-hmm.
understood how they grow. This one has never been, or for a long time, has never been out in the open. So it continues to grow and search for light, and the lower branches get cut off and they die, and then they create these wonderful things. So
It's
this is about
incredible.
15 feet off of our property. property line on our neighboring. And I started it in the field. I took the panel out, and it's fairly, I think it's about
It's
52 inches high.
54 inches. It's huge for a
And
drawing.
again, and tried to get the loosely get the spacing in between the branches. A lot of times when I'm drawing, particularly when I'm drawing from life, I'm drawing instead of drawing the branches, I'm drawing the space in between the branches. And then most of this was done in the studio. But again, I had some photographic reference, but I'd go outside and stand and kind of have a communication with this. I love the structure of it.
How in the world, how long did this take you? Months and months?
Yeah, I had this. It was in my studio for probably 2 years, I think, and maybe not quite, but a good 20 months. I didn't work on it in the summertime because the other deciduous trees were leafed out, and it obscured a lot of the. So I could only work on it in the fall once the leaves came off, and then in the wintertime.
Even though you had photo reference.
Even though I like to go out and be able to, to see it, even though I'm not working in the field, I can go out and study it.
So if you have a question, you're like, I don't know what this value is. You go back out there and look at it.
Yeah,
come
or I
back
don't
in.
know how, a lot of times if you're taking a photograph, you don't know where how that branch is turning or where it's going. The
Right.
photograph will show you that it's in front of this other branch, but you really don't know, what that relationship is. Is it 6 inches behind, or is it touching it? And that all comes into effect of how, the relationship within it. And
So you're not copying this photograph. You're saying that branch, I went out there, I studied it. That branch is 6 feet behind the one in front of it. So I've got to modify the values and the textures and the detail accordingly.
Yeah. And then you get to a point, and then you'll say, all right, here's a spot that I want to enhance the value of it. I'm going to make it a little darker than it may have been in reality for the sake of the drawing.
Yeah, like you've got a cluster of dark on the top quarter, which is just beautiful. And I'm assuming you did that on purpose. And
yeah,
then
where you're kind of looking up underneath them. You're seeing that, the bottom side of that.
yeah.
And then get down to the front, and the lower branches, they're still above my eye level, but they're a lot closer. You're looking more at the middle of them.
I love how you simplified the background. Very abstract. It almost looks like you stumped in some tone and then just suggested a few trees.
I think a lot of the background was, I'll use liquid graphite, and just brush it on.
Oh, really?
Let it dry, and then take a kneaded eraser and a hard, a 6H or a 5, 6, 7H pencil, and add a little texture in it without having to worry about the design or the competition of a value competing with the main tree.
So what kind of paper are you using that can hold up to liquid graphite?
This one is, I think, just a standard watercolor paper that I mount
With
on
a tooth?
It's got, it's a cold press.
You're drawn on cold press. So if I looked at this in real life, then it wouldn't be nearly this refined looking. It's gonna be pretty rough.
Yeah, it's got I think it's Arches, it's a 380 weight watercolor paper.
Wow, that's not. It just looks like it could be Bristol because it's so detailed, reduced, right?
Yeah.
But you're working on a rough paper, so it's probably a lot more gritty and rough looking. Yeah.
And a lot of the texture of the bark is just kind of a soft graphite or charcoal, kind of brushed on and then enhanced and modulated with the graphite pencil.
I wish I could see the original. I bet it looks even more incredible. Huh. Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time. I could talk to you for hours. We should do this again. I hope you'd be willing to do it again because.
Well, Utah is one of my favorite places, and I know there's that fabulous Maynard Dixon show that recently opened up at the Brigham Young University.
It did?
Yeah,
I didn't
just
know that. I got to go check it out. Yeah.
last month. I want to say like the 10th of October or something. I think it's up for over a year.
Are you going to
I'm
come
hoping
down?
to get down to Utah to see it.
Okay, well, call me when you do, because I live right in Salt Lake City, so you'll have to drive through Salt Lake. Well, no, if you're coming from Wyoming, I guess you don't have to, but either way, it'd be good to see you in person, meet you in person.
Well, I'd love to. And I want to say before we get off, you had uh, a series of, I'm assuming they're siblings. I think there were four, which I just thought was so brilliant. That's where I really saw the Wayne Thiebaud influence. You put the youngest one on a ladder.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Put her on the biggest canvas. And then each one where the oldest sibling had the smallest canvas, but
Yeah.
all the canvases were different sizes.
Yeah.
And what a brilliant way to do that.
Oh,
So
thanks.
it's such a creative way. And I thought, what a lucky family to have those portraits.
Well, thanks. Yeah, they liked it. Well, I often go into people's homes and look at where the thing is going to be hanging. That's one of the nice things about a commission,
Yeah.
because I'll use the architecture to design the painting sometimes. And not always, but sometimes. In this case, they had this mid-century modern house, and they said they were going to hang it right above a staircase that went down into the basement.
Yeah.
And so the painting actually goes opposite the staircase. So the staircase goes down, the painting goes up. So it kind of accents that piece of architecture. That was fun painting to do. That's old. They're all married now. Makes me feel like an old fart.
Where does the time go?
I know, man. Seriously. Well, I want to ask you one more question before we go, because you've obviously been a really successful painter. Is there any advice that you would give an aspiring young artist that wants to follow in your footsteps?
What a great question. Again, I think probably one of the most important things that I would consider is to be true to yourself, be true to your interest. Never take what you do seriously, but never take yourself too seriously. Never, ever, ever chase a market. And we all have to, we have to have enough to continue to buy paint and stuff, but that doesn't really take that much. A tube of paint and a brush, they go a long way. And to paint your interest, and if you do that honestly, I have found that there is always an audience there. If you try to chase the market's changing all the time, you'll never catch it, and you'll always be behind, and you'll never know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And study. I think this is a wonderful profession we have. That doesn't mean it's easy, but I'm always a little flabbergasted by egos, and it's an interesting problem. It's a conundrum because if you've ever been to really any museum, let alone the great museums of the world, or the Metropolitan or the Tate and the Prado, and you look at what Rembrandt did in the early 1600s, and you think we haven't improved at all. Why do we even continue? So it's an egotistical thing that we do, but I'm always amazed at people who have big egos, because I think to me it's a lack of depth and a lack of sight. I mean, how anybody can stand in front of a Rembrandt or a Bouguereau or John Singer Sargent or Joaquin Sorolla or any of them, Antonio Lopez Garcia and Andrew Wyeth. I mean, we could be here for months just naming artists, but any of the great artists, how you can stand in front of some of their work and then have an ego and think you're the cat's meow just leaves me baffled. But
yeah, that's a good point.
Be true to yourself is probably the best advice I could give somebody starting.
Yeah,
and be honest. Know your subject matter. I'm always surprised at when I'm teaching the number of people who, claim to be landscape painters, but they can't tell you the difference between a beech tree and a pine tree. And for me, the more you understand your subject matter, the more interesting your subject matter becomes, and then the more you want to convey it, where you kind of honor that subject matter.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And on that ego thing, but I don't know if you've experienced this, but I'd say as I've gotten older, and I've been painting 20 years now, not as long as you have, but and during that 20 years, I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of artists, and of course, through this podcast, meet a lot of artists. And what I've noticed is the really, really good artists have the smaller egos. It's the better they are, the smaller their ego. And what I'm putting together is that a big ego makes for a poor student. And that's why all these great artists have small egos, because their lack of ego makes them a sponge. They just get better and better and better. That's just my theory.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. The other thing I'd certainly recommend is continue to experiment. Just allow yourself time, and all of the deadlines and the pressures and stuff. Allow yourself time to just do something for the freedom of trying something new all the time, because you never know what's going to work. What's going to change the way you put paint on a canvas, or I remember I saw Kwang Ho do a demonstration one time, and he had this fabulous painting going, and he took out his hotel key, the little credit card type key, and started to use it as a squeegee.
He's a magician.
Who thinks of that?
Well, you kind of do. You're doing that kind of stuff. Yeah, Kwang Ho, the fastest painter in the West, is what his wife calls him. Yeah.
So, but to see and to remain curious, and go look at great. I think you look at great art, not just painting, but go look at the great art, the masterpieces of the world, because they, I think far too often we think of history as behind us, and that's all in the past. I think if we look at it as they're leading us, they're ahead of us, they came before us, and we're behind them looking forward. Gives us a different sense of proportion, perspective, and then you almost feel like I have an obligation to try to become the very best I can be. And that's, you can only do that one way, of being honest by yourself and staying curious and being a student.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, Tim, it's been a huge honor to talk to you. Thanks a ton for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come do this podcast with me.
It's been an honor to be on this podcast, and thank you for doing this podcast.
Oh, man, it's my pleasure.
The only disadvantage I see is it might take away too much of your painting time, and you should.
Yeah, it does. It takes a bit, but it's like I've said to other artists, it's like going back to school. So I think of it as my few hours of education every week. It's great. Thanks for tuning in to the Undraped Artist Podcast. If you enjoyed it, subscribe. And if you could, leave a comment or review. That really helps the channel. Please share the show with your friends, and if you're feeling generous, consider a monthly donation at theundrapedartist.com. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week.